finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another great episode. And this week we are continuing our series on the physician as patient. This week we have a really special guest that I'm super excited for you to hear. We interview our brother-in-law, Dr. Larry Adam. So obviously Tim has known Larry since he dated and married his sister many, many years ago. And in the interview, you're going to hear some things that we'd actually never heard about in his story and how he sort of faced his own mortality. I think you'll find it really interesting. But before we get into the meat of the show, just a quick word from our sponsor this week, which is Panacea Financial. They provide banking for doctors because it was founded by doctors. They have a nationwide loan, checking, and savings options designed specifically for doctors and doctors in training. Their specialized suite of financial products give medical students, residents, and practicing physicians greater freedom to forge their futures and at affordable rates. By reducing financial barriers and burdens, Panacea Financial ensures that all doctors have increased capacity to serve their patients and the population at large. Do you need a good home for your banking needs? If you do, remember to go to panaceafinancial.com. That is Panacea, that's Panacea, financial.com to get started. Panacea Financial is a division of Primus, member FDIC. And now, on to our interview.
Okay, so today we have a privilege of interviewing Dr. Larry Adam as we continue our series on the doctor as the patient. I have known Larry for most of my life. I've had the privilege of him being my brother-in-law since I was 12 years old, actually. I think it was 12 years old. So Larry, tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and then we'll get into how your life changed after a very significant medical event.
Yeah, so I was trained in medicine in Canada. I graduated in 1980 and started working in my family practice in 1981 after I finished my internship year. And I worked basically in one clinic with one group of colleagues and patients for 37 years. And a little over 3 years ago, I retired. And I haven't worked as a physician since late 2018.
Do you miss it?
I miss the interaction with the patients. I miss the relational part of medicine. And I suppose to some degree miss having my time spent doing something that I thought was very significant. I miss that.
So for our audience, you tell them, but you didn't transition, slowly phase out, did you? Or actually you did. You did a little bit of locums before.
Yeah, so once I realized that I wasn't going to be able to manage my existing medical practice because I just wasn't as efficient as I used to be before my heart attack and heart surgery, I transitioned to doing locum work, and I did that for about 9 months in about 3 different local settings, and then at that point decided to retire completely.
Okay, so you mentioned the heart attack.
Yeah, take us back to that and
Take
tell
us
us.
back. When was that? How did that day start? And, we'll kind of push that boulder down the hill, so to speak.
Yeah. So in February of 2015, I had a great day golfing, actually. Carried my golf clubs, had a wonderful experience, though it was Canada in February golfing. And then 2 days later, when I woke up in the morning, I had a bit of aching between my shoulder blades and my back. Thought it might be heartburn. Took some antacid, had breakfast. Symptoms went away, and then I fortunate enough to be able to walk to work from my home. So it's only about 3 or 4 blocks. And while I was walking to work after breakfast, these symptoms came back in my back, and so I went to the local pharmacy, bought some antacid, thinking I might need some help with my symptoms if they recurred at work and at my office. And as I was leaving the pharmacy, actually, I recalled a verse in the Old Testament that talked about fools seeing danger and keeping on going, and a wise person sees danger and changes direction.
Okay, so let's just pump the brakes on this for
Wow.
1 second. So you literally, that verse came into your head at that exact time?
Yes, I had been reading through the book of Proverbs in the previous month. So when I got to the door of the pharmacy and I had that verse reverberate in my head, I decided I probably shouldn't go to work. I changed directions. I walked back home and asked my wife to drive me to the local hospital. So she did that. And we went through the normal evaluation process in the emergency department with lab work and EKGs, and the first set of tests were completely normal. But the routine is to repeat them after 4 to 6 hours to see if anything changes. And on the repeat testing, my ECG was still normal, but my lab work suggested that I was having a heart attack. So that was a shock.
And so while that's, obviously a shock, I mean, as a physician, you hear these symptoms from patients, and it's usually one of the first things that pops through our head is to rule out the worst thing. But when the shoe's on the other foot and you're the patient, it's interesting. I mean, to hear it from you, and I know myself how it's like, nah, it's probably heartburn, not just denial, but so when you're sitting there in the hospital and they tell you that your enzymes are elevated, like what are you thinking? What's going through your head? You're still in denial?
I'm thinking they're talking to somebody. They got their tests on the wrong person. Part of the background was that, the previous months I'd been exercising on a treadmill in our apartment. I had absolutely no warning symptoms of any kind, and I don't have any risk factors for coronary artery disease either. So, the first when they tell you something like that's happening, you're kind of in disbelief. And then, of course, you switch to, well, maybe things are subtle and not that desperate. And so they were able to organize an angiogram that same afternoon. I had to go by ambulance to another hospital for that. And, the hope was that I would just maybe have mild changes and need a stent. So it didn't turn out that way. The angiogram turned out to be catastrophic, really. I had a completely blocked LAD, which is the Widowmaker. I had a blocked diagonal. I had significant narrowing in 2 parts of my right coronary, and I had serious narrowing in my circumflex. So the angiographer helped me to understand that I would need heart bypass surgery. So at that point, then the shock kind of really set in, because I thought I was going to get away with something subtle, and it turned out that I was going to transition from the golf course to the operating room in 5 days.
Right.
Wow.
Well, exactly. But it is interesting because it just to kind of, both for our physician listeners and for our non-physician listeners, The thing that's interesting is, this is the nature of the presentation of an acute coronary event. Very rarely is there a warning. It is, you go from 75% narrowed or 50% narrowed or 40% narrowed where you have absolutely no symptoms to 100% in a period of hours or minutes. And that's the thing that's so scary. And, when we're evaluating these, in an urgent care setting, used to make me so angry because there'd be people that are like, do an EKG and one troponin and send the patient on their way. And I'm like, well, no, that's not a workup for heart disease. That's not an acute coronary workup. I mean, it takes time.
Right.
You have to do serial enzymes and serial EKGs or nothing.
Patients don't understand that for sure because they think that they can walk in, do my EKG. If it looks perfect, I'm good. And so we have to explain that to them for sure. But even
like, why are you sending me to the ER? And it's like, because I don't want you to die.
Yeah. Well, it just, as you say, it just points out the need to do a proper repeat workup. If they hadn't delayed, if they hadn't kept me in the ER and done testing 4 to 6 hours later, they'd have sent me home. And as it happened, when I was in the hospital after my angiogram, I had to wait 5 days for my surgery because they used some triple anticoagulant cocktail for my angiogram. And one of the drugs couldn't be reversed by any medication. And so they had to wait for that to wear off. And my first night in the hospital, I definitely had further infarction. Finally at that point, I had some typical sort of crushing elephant on your chest pain at the front.
And did they say why the reason was for using that? I guess I'm thinking ahead, like in case somebody needs to go to bypass, why would they give you the triple cocktail that you have to wait on? Did they say why?
Yeah, all I can really tell you is that at the time, they said it was a typical way to anticoagulate before an angiogram. And it may have been that was chosen simply because maybe even their expectation was that at the worst, I might need a stent. So when it turned out that I needed a lot more than that, that anticoagulation process turned out to delay ultimately my surgery.
So what was going through your head as the elephant is literally on your chest? And you're a physician, you know what's going on. And I would be thinking, oh crap, am I going to make it to my bypass?
The setup for kind of my first night challenge in the hospital was after my angiogram, they moved me to a recovery room. And because I was the last angiogram of the afternoon on a Friday, I was the only patient in there. And it just so happened that the slot that they pushed me in on the gurney had a couple of photographs on the ceiling right above my head. And what happened was when they wheeled me into the recovery room post angiogram, my eyes were closed actually, and I was thinking, I was processing being told that I had such serious disease. And at that point, I thought, if I'm going to panic and be full of fear, it's going to be now because this is a serious situation. So I thought back again to my experience in my life, in my faith in God, to ask myself if there was something in the Bible that I could quote to myself to calm my fear. And I thought of Psalm 23. And what's amazing about that experience is that the second line or so in Psalm 23 is about God being with us in green pastures and beside quiet waters. And when I opened my eyes and looked up at the ceiling, there were two images on the ceiling when that verse was going through my mind. And one of them was of a lake, and one of them was a meadow with flowers in it. And so for me, that brought me a tremendous sense of peace to know that I could be confident that God was with me and that I wasn't forgotten.
Man, I'm seriously tearing up and getting chills. That is, I mean, why I shouldn't feel that way because I'm, as a believer, you just know that should be reassuring. But every time I hear stories like that, it just sends me goosies all over my body.
Yeah. Well, right. And that was the second time that you had been given a verse from either Proverbs or
Yeah.
Psalms
Yeah.
in this entire experience.
Yeah.
Man.
The incident that I didn't relate to you happened actually between the local hospital and my transfer to the third for my angiogram by ambulance. They called a nurse in to the emergency room to go with me in the transport vehicle. And she had, her name was, I don't know, Faith or something like that. She introduced herself in the emergency room. She said, she was going to go with me in the ambulance and she had to get the paperwork together. So while I was waiting for her to do that, I had a song actually in my head that I'd heard on the radio in the previous month, which talks about the grace of God being with us. It's called Your Grace Will Find Me, wherever we are in life. And so I had this song reverberating in my mind as they wheeled me up into the ambulance. And then the nurse got up into the ambulance with me. And it wasn't the nurse that they'd called in to the ER to transport with me. Instead, the nurse that got up into the ambulance with me, her name was Grace.
Oh my gosh.
She had this name tag on. And I looked at her and I had this, line from this song in my mind by Matt Redman, Your Grace Will Find Me. And Grace got in the ambulance with me.
Good night.
So I actually had 3 episodes like that within the space of 8 hours, actually. So, comfort from God is a real thing.
Amen to that.
And of course, I also was comforted by my family, my wife, who, came in to see me the first evening I was in the hospital after she was sent home from the local emergency room expecting to be called that I'd been stented and transported back to the local hospital. And instead, the surgeon called her and told her, your husband's going nowhere. So
let's fast forward to the surgery.
Yeah.
There's 2 things that really stink about bypass surgery. One, the fact that they have to zipper your sternum.
Yeah.
And the second, of course, is the heart-lung machine, which is not fun to go on or off of, as we know if we've ever had patients or family members that have had bypass. So what was that like waking up with, your chest wired shut?
Well, of course, initially you're kind of, I don't know how aware you really are of your environment. I do remember coming to in the ICU, and the bizarre thing was I was hungry. Of course, maybe knowing me, that's not that bizarre.
Oh my gosh.
And so actually they put a tray in front of me with some non-low-fat food to eat. I don't know. It's just I don't know how to describe what I perceived or felt like. It was wonderful to be able to see my wife again and recognize her and to be able to respond to her without, being sort of affected in a terrible way by the operation. I don't know. It just sort of seemed all very matter of fact to me. I do remember pulling out all of the wires in my chest that were, through my chest wall and in within my chest. And of course, I remember them removing the chest tubes, which isn't very much fun. But I don't have a lot of recollection about what that first day or so was like. The one thing I will say about the kind of the consequence of the operation is that I think it did affect my cognitive function somewhat. And that only became apparent kind of as the weeks and months went on. I was told that could happen and that full recovery could happen within 6 months. But that didn't happen for me. I ended up not really having a brain that worked as efficiently as it used to. I couldn't concentrate the way I used to be able to. And that's really what made it difficult to go back to my previous medical practice and manage it, because I had a lot of patients and I just couldn't manage the workload as efficiently as I used to. As far as the zipper goes, There was one really funny incident. A person's terribly afraid to cough or sneeze or even laugh after this because it hurts in your chest so much. They give you a pillow to hug, into your sternum so that if you have to cough or something, you can actually support your rib cage. But what happened was it was about day 2 or 3. I was out on the ward by this point, and after my wife warned me not to choke on a throat lozenge, I put one in my mouth and then promptly laid back. And of course, within literally seconds, it lodged in my upper airway.
Esophagus.
And my wife and my sister, who's an ICU nurse, were sitting at the bedside, and they didn't realize that this had happened. And I had this brief thought that if I wasn't going to choke to death on a lozenge, I should probably do my best to exhale. And I fired that thing out of my airway. It bounced on the floor by the bedside to the shock of my wife and my sister. And then they started laughing, which really hurt because then I started laughing.
It's like you survived a bypass, but you're going to die from a throat lozenge choking you to death.
Yes. I said later, I didn't want the headline in the local newspaper to be doctor survives heart surgery but chokes to death on a lozenge.
Sue Halls. No, I'm kidding.
Yes.
No, I mean, exactly. And then after all these, obvious messages from God, grace is with you, et cetera, you die from the lozenge, and it's kind of like the children of Israel getting, 4 feet away from the end of the Red Sea, and then it's just like, just
collapses.
Kidding. Just kidding.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that would have been ironic.
You come out of surgery, your recovery is pretty much uneventful, right? You other than the lozenge incident, and
I had a very good recovery. I didn't have any problems with my blood pressure, with rhythm disturbance. Pre-surgical, my heart pump function was reduced. Post-surgically, and ultimately, several months later, when I was reassessed that way, my heart pump function completely returned to normal, which I was extremely grateful for.
Right, and I'm just going to interject. It's another point here. Even with catastrophic illness, if you go into a catastrophic illness in pretty good shape, your chances of coming out of it in pretty good shape are significantly higher. You didn't have a bunch of concomitant illness or, medical problems prior to this. You were in reasonably good shape. You were walking a lot, golfing, et cetera, and so forth, which makes an enormous difference in recovery.
Yes. Some of the people that I saw in the hospital post-operatively, other patients, looked far more compromised. But many of them were, before their surgery, had diabetes, they had rhythm problems, they had heart pump problems, they had lung problems from COPD or smoking and so on. And so many of them looked a lot worse off post-surgically than I did. That's certainly true.
So you eventually, let's fast forward a little bit, relatively
how soon after? Yeah, I'm
smooth
sorry,
recovery.
Tim. Did you go back to work? Is what I'm wondering. What about you?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Like, how long after?
I went back to work 3 months after my surgery. And I had a lot of support from my colleagues at work. While I was in the hospital and recovering, they arranged for a locum replacement for me. And but when I went back to my practice, I went back with the expectation that I was going to have to kind of ease into it. And so I booked probably a third fewer people per day in my office. And to my dismay, it took me 2 hours a day longer to look after a third fewer patients. And that was a persistent theme for months, for the next 9 months. It never got better than that. And I felt like I got to the place where I thought that my patients' access to me was not good enough. I couldn't see enough of them. There was a lot of backlog happening. And I felt bad for the patients because, they deserve to be able to access a physician. And so my limitations ultimately led me to decide not to try and persist in my own practice.
Did you ever get the sense from your colleagues in your group that there was pressure to get back to your previous levels of seeing patients full time, or was there pressure from that end of things? Do you think it was more yourself and expectations?
It was my own expectations. I never had any pressure whatsoever from my colleagues, and even from the patients. I mean, the ones that got in to see me, that got appointments, even if it was a bit of a delay, were grateful. But what I kept hearing from the front office staff is that a lot of people were disappointed that they had to wait longer to see me, and so that's kind of where the pressure came from, was just the pressure to be available to people in a way that I used to be and just couldn't manage any longer.
So you mentioned the, you felt like cognitively, you had, a harder time focusing, staying on task, however you want to say this. You couldn't, I think the exact quote was, you couldn't think as efficiently. Was there an emotional component to that as well? Because we hear that there's all sorts of different things that happen, coming off the, the bypass machine.
Yes, absolutely. And my wife would attest to this, and she recognized this, and we discussed it a bit later. But my emotional sort of lability, my ability to become angry I had a way more of a hair trigger, and I was much sadder than I normally am. I was so emotionally, I was different. I think over time, it took about 6 months for that to kind of go back to my previous sort of story and picture and emotional nature. But the first 6 months were quite different that way. Yeah. What happened for me is when I realized that my cognitive function wasn't quite the same, I went and had a very thorough 6-hour evaluation with a psychologist who was trained to sort of evaluate brain performance, and they confirmed that what was happening was that I was having trouble with sort of the efficiency of my thought process, and my thinking in some areas was had to be more deliberate, and that I could lose concentration more easily than I used to.
Now, they never thought that you were unsafe to practice medicine, correct?
No, I mean, part of the reason for this 6-hour assessment was to document for myself and for, in fact, any regulating body that I was, in fact, in a proper place to be able to practice medicine. So it really was part of confirming that it was a matter of going slower, and it wasn't a matter of critical thinking and understanding and recollection and education kind of having fled my brain.
I think that would be really hard, though. Like, I just think of any high process function that you do, like whether it's like, I can only imagine, even if you take something as mundane as, as running or skiing. Like, I do a lot of skiing, and you don't think about it, right? It's like playing a musical instrument. When you're good at playing a musical instrument, you just play the music, you don't think about it. But then to all of a sudden think of, oh my gosh, I can't play the same number of notes per minute, and I can't, and will it ever come back? But then you take that and you multiply that by, an order of magnitude, because you're not just doing a job or playing an instrument or doing a sport. You're actually caring for people, and your decisions really, really matter. So I would imagine that would be quite anxiety provoking. I mean, I would be really freaking myself out.
Yeah, I would say that it didn't provoke anxiety or fear in me. It provoked disappointment, maybe some sadness. But when I sort of thought through it a little bit further, my attitude about this really transitioned to being grateful, because I was alive. And because I still had the ability to function as a human being, I still could function as a spouse, as a parent of adult children, as a grandparent. And yes, although I couldn't function in the same way in my profession, um, I never really in my life defined myself by being an efficient doctor. I defined myself um, on a different basis. And so when my identity changed from being an efficient doctor to a less efficient doctor, it didn't create fear or panic in me. There was, of course, financial consequence to being a less efficient doctor. But again, I don't. Again, this is tied to my faith and my worldview, and that is that God has promised to provide for my need and for the need of my family. And if that need was going to be provided for with a more modest income, then that's the way it was going to be, and it wasn't to be afraid of, really.
So it was 9 months back into your regular practice, and then you realized, this isn't, fair to your patients and, maybe your partners or whatever. And then you retired from that practice and then did locum work. Is that correct?
Yes, and the reason I decided to do it that way was I could kind of space out my workload in the sense of working 4 or 5 days in a setting and then having a bit more time off, so that I could maintain kind of my strength and so on. And so we had several places in our local community where I could go and fill in for people going on vacation, or people, or in one setting at an outright walk-in clinic where I would just be added to the roster there. And frankly, that type of medical practice was not very enjoyable to me. I felt that I really could not do as sort of a thorough a job as I could with my own practice, because I didn't have all of the history. I didn't have all of the background, and taking the time to get that information is difficult to do, particularly in a urgent care center or walk-in clinic type arrangement. So I just tried to do my best. Ultimately, it was my accountant who suggested to me that my income was so pathetic from working as a locum that I might as well quit.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
and that it was time probably to retire, because I'd looked after our retirement planning effectively enough that we could actually do that and not starve or be homeless.
Which is, a really important part of the decision as well, right? Because you're at a point in your career where you're financially independent now, and that you can do that. Whereas if it had been, say, at age 40, or if you were at a point where financially you weren't able to do that, it creates a whole other scenario, obviously.
Right. It begs the example of, 2 or 3 episodes ago, we did an episode called "We Have 4 F's to Give," which was, starts with faith, family, finances, and then fun. And it's so critical that all of those pieces are in the right order and are given the correct priority. So for instance, if this would have happened 20 years earlier, or it was a cancer diagnosis or whatever, you're like, well, thank goodness I had enough disability insurance, or whatever the case may be. In this scenario, you were towards the end of your career anyways, so you're either approaching or at financial independence, and so then it makes that decision a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think it's definitely points out the the value of being thoughtful about planning for retirement, and also disability insurance issues. Not assuming that just because you appear to be a healthy person that nothing can go sideways on you. And with life insurance, when you're a younger physician, I think one of the ironies of the timing of this was just prior to my heart attack, I had done a review of my life insurance and had found out that I could get good coverage through a different company that I'd been covered by before for less premium money, and had gone through the process of qualifying for life insurance. Canceled my existing policy when I got confirmation from the insurance person that I was accepted as a client. And after a 2 or 3 day delay on him bringing the paperwork for me to sign, he was to bring those documents to me the morning I had my heart attack. So instead of being able to sign up for new life insurance, I'd done the foolish thing of canceling my previous one, assuming that everything was good. And in fact, that very day, I became an uninsurable person before my signature got on the paperwork. And so I ended up with no life insurance. But again, this happened when I was 61 years old, and life insurance was less critical.
Right, but that's just, we hear all these stories through our financial planner and through a few of the podcasts that I listen to about just the big no-nos and be careful. And we've made actually most of the financial mistakes over the years. We're happy to diss on, but honestly, I mean, just sharing that for people to know. This can happen in the worst case scenario. It does really happen.
Well, that's what insurance is for, is for the worst case scenario.
But I mean, like the margin of that, like what are the odds that it would just happen where he cancels and the paperwork didn't come through? And I mean, literally, it could have been a disaster.
No, I mean, I phoned the insurance agent from my hospital bed at Delta Hospital and told him I was having a heart attack, and he almost had a heart attack because he delayed bringing the paperwork to me.
I'm sure.
Thought I was probably going to get in some sort of legal situation with him, which I never did. But
good night.
In any event, I think that again, assuming that one is going to live tomorrow can be a huge mistake.
So, out of this whole experience, when you got through it to the other side, you're back to work, or even at the point where you're doing the locums, did you ever have like an aha moment? I hate that term. I don't know why I said it, but where you really kind of went, wow, now I see things in a different light or manner, or how you approach patients differently, or just any kind of thing that changed your outlook on how a patient feels from the other side?
Yeah, I think, what it does, these kinds of situations, these events point out the fact that if you really want to understand where another person is at, you can only really understand where they're at when you experience what they experience. And I used to think as a physician that I could sort of understand how patients reacted or responded or would respond when I gave them information, sometimes serious bad news, so to speak. And actually you don't really, because you haven't been through it yourself. Having said that, I think what it did also is it pointed out to me that we have an incredible responsibility as physicians to be trustworthy to patients, because especially when something happens that's out of the blue, you find yourself as a patient in a position where you must choose to trust the people that are taking care of you. And that is a huge thing when you're on the patient side of the equation, I can tell you. So as a physician, to understand that we have this huge responsibility and a huge opportunity really to make a huge difference in the life of people, to help them recover, to help them get along, and to improve in their health. So, that kind of, I went through that sort of recognition, if you will. And in a way, what it did for me as a physician after that, when I went back to work, was it helped me to understand that what I was doing was significant. Because sometimes, even as a professional, you're not sure at times whether what you're doing is significant. mean, part of the problem, of course, as a physician is that everybody that you help eventually dies of something. And, your goal is to help them not die too soon. But ultimately, we lose all of our patients. And so to find value in the fact that we help people have a better quality of life, a longer life, is worth something. And so, if anything, I respected my profession more after the fact as well. I would say that came out of it too.
Really,
Wow.
really great stuff. This is, it's interesting because, we've known each other for, decades. And I never really heard this story. And it is a tremendous story. And we really appreciate you sharing this with us. Like, this was, honestly, we're almost 20 episodes into this, and this is the most moving thing we have done on this podcast. It was really humbling, to say the least.
Yeah.
So we really
I
appreciate
agree.
your
I
time
agree.
and your vulnerability to share this. This is just awesome.
Well, you're welcome. I mean, if it's helpful to someone else to hear this, then it was worth it.
Well, it might save somebody's life. I think of my father walking to church one night, and he had really bad heartburn, and then he could hardly function for a day or two after, and then it got better, and it was clearly an MI that a heart attack that he had ignored, that was found on an EKG years later before he had a triple bypass. So men are really good at ignoring things that can be serious.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes when symptoms seem subtle or seem to be a reflection of something unimportant, it's I guess men are worse at this than ladies, is what I hear all the time too. They don't tend to listen to their own body. I mean, last year in November, I had another incident out of the blue where I had a pulmonary embolism. But for me, that was a different situation because the symptoms were not subtle. I had horrible pain in my chest and couldn't breathe. So I had another crack at going through it.
Right. That's a whole other thing we actually didn't get into with the listeners, is that you were the patient again. And it was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. Larry is the patient.
But he's not disabled, and he can still absolutely crush my skull in golf.
He can.
So
He can.
Oh, well.
That doesn't say much, maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's not a compliment.
No, I think that counts.
I love it, and I love it, and I love seeing it happen. It gives me great pleasure because Tim's always crushing my skull in golf, so I'm happy to be at the bottom and watch. But we really,
there's no other way in which I would crush either of you, but on the golf course, I can still accomplish that, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we are so thankful, Larry, for you just being, like Tim said, vulnerable and sharing your story and the emotional component of it. And I know that both the medical community as well as the non-medical get absolutely something from that. So thanks again for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, I hope you really enjoyed that interview that we had with Larry. Tim and I really enjoyed hearing his story. It was really touching, as you can tell. And we are going to be bringing you more of The Doctor as Patient. We've got some great interviews lined up, which I'm really excited for you to hear. Remember our sponsor this week, which is Panacea Financial, for your banking needs as a physician, because they are built by physicians. Panacea's PRN personal loan was designed specifically for physicians and physicians in training. Go to panaceafinancial.com and open your new account today. Panacea Financial is a division of Primus, member FDIC. All right, can't wait to see you guys next week, because it will be a Doc Tales with Cocktails, where we got lots of fun stirred up for you.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
Oh, we tried try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.